In this chapter, we're going to have some fun. Now, I'd like to think we've had fun throughout the chapters so far, but in this chapter, we're going to talk about effects and the appearance panel, which I think is like really cool. Let's start with a new document. Let's go up to the word File and select New, and I will choose my favorite web profile, which is 960 by 560, because it fits so well in my working window. What we're talking about here is effects. Now, you have an effects area right up here, but a couple of versions ago, you had effects and you had another option here called filters, effects and filters. Effects back then were temporary. In other words, you could apply them and come back the next day and go, I don't like that. I think I'll take that off. Filters were permanent, but it did allow you and opened a doorway into things like Photoshop filters, which was kind of cool. But now you'll notice there's only effect, and that's been there for like 2 versions. Why? Because everything, including Photoshop filters, are now temporary. It's all non-destructive editing. I absolutely love that, and we can do some pretty cool things here. Now let's start out. Let's pick up the star and draw a star over here. Just do something simple. Any shape you want. Pick a shape. Okay. Let me come over here and bring that to about there. I'm going to hold the Alt key down and make a copy. Now actually I do want to give those a different color, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to select both at the same time. I have from the previous lesson, if you're kind of following along, I was in the typography workspace in the last lesson, and we're now back in the essentials. So we got them both selected. We have the fill over here selected, which is important. And, well, choose a color. Just give them a color. It doesn't matter what color. Okay, so we have 2 objects on the screen. Let's talk about these effects. Now, if we go up to the word effect, let's select this one and click here. Let's go down to Photoshop Effects, because I can remember years ago, not just a year, but years ago, I would be in Photoshop doing something kind of neat with an effect, or a filter actually in Photoshop. And I would say, I wish I could do that in Illustrator, but I understand why I can't, because Illustrator is vector and this is pixels and stuff like that. And look at that. Gaussian blur. I can actually apply, theoretically, a vector Gaussian blur to an object. And let's do that one. That's an easy one. Now let's turn the preview on. Now we can go higher or lower. Let's leave that at 10. Click OK. So now we have 2 objects. And one of the objects is a effect applied Gaussian blur, and the other one is a regular vector object. Technically speaking, they're both vector. They're still vector. But this one emulates the soft edges of something like a photograph. The cool thing about this is technically it is still vector, which means I can change the size if I want to, make it bigger or smaller, and it won't impact the quality when I do that because the vector will redraw itself when I change the shape. Try doing that in Photoshop. Now, I'm not selecting anything. What we want to do in this lesson is talk about how we control the document when it comes to effects. So we're going to go back to the word effect in the pull-down menu and go down to Document Raster Effect Settings. Understand what this means. These are the raster effect settings for this document, for everything we've done and everything we will do. Okay, it's not just for, say, an object that we select. It's for the whole document. And don't forget, Illustrator is document specific, which simply means the fact that if you make changes and you open up a new document, then you'll have to come back here and change it again because everything starts out brand new. Let's go ahead and select that. Okay, here we go. The first thing we have is color model. Now we are in an RGB document. Okay, it says right there, RGB. We could change that to CMYK, and that would say CMYK if we did, but we also have grayscale or bitmap, your choice. We'll leave it at RGB for now. Next one down is resolution. Now you've got 72, 150, and 300. 72 is fine for web design, monitors, Microsoft PowerPoint, things like that. Medium is 150, and that would be fine for things like regular old inkjet printers, things like that. 300 is more high-end printers and 4-color press. You've got an other if you want to plug in your own number. Let's leave that alone for a moment. Background is white or transparent. Now, most of the time, I would think you're probably going to want these areas in here not to be white, but to be transparent. And there might be a time or two that you want them as white. Most of the time, it's probably transparent. That's the default. Anti-aliasing right here. What does that do? Well, it softens things. It helps things on a brick and mortar raster-based screen made up of pixels to look softer and more natural. But if you do turn that on and you're working a lot with effects on text, it can cause things like text to look a little bit blurry and hard to read. So it depends on what you're doing. We won't get to clipping masks until another chapter, but we can use this as a clipping mask and add 36 pixels around the object. Now look at this one. They're both the same. This one has that blur, so technically it's a little bit bigger, in a sense, than this one. I'm saying, yeah, you should add a little bit of room around that thing so I don't clip off my effect. And if you're working with spot colors, well, there you go. Now let me change something so you can see what's going to happen here. Let's go into Color Model and change it to grayscale. Now click OK and watch what happens. Well, the one with the effect on it is impacted. The one that doesn't have the effect isn't. Let me press undo. Let me do that again. Let's go back up here again and go into Raster Effects. Let's change the resolution to Other. And let's do something you probably wouldn't do. I'm going to go down to like 5. Click OK. Check that out. Well, it kind of looks like those pixelated things you see over people's faces in a movie or something when they don't want you to see who their face is. What we're controlling is effects, not objects. If it's just an object that you draw or an image that you bring in, it's going to be fine. But when you start working with this stuff, then this is controlling what that's going to be when it's either printed or displayed and saved. Document raster effect settings. They impact the entire document.